We released it to probably 20 people and the metrics were just off the charts. Basically, if someone did 5 sessions with Heidi, their retention was like 90% daily. They would just never stop using it. They would use it for every visit. When you see something like that, you just can't ignore it. You know, on one hand, you're doing the most like grueling customer implementation disaster, like people just will not use what you've built. And then on the other hand, one feature within that existing product, if presented in a particular way, they just can't put it down.
Welcome back to Wild Hearts. I'm your host, Mason Yates, on the investment team at Blackbird Ventures. Every founder fears it. The moment you realize everything you've built might not work. For Tom, the founder of Heidi Health, that moment came at the end of 2022. Heidi, the ambitious telehealth platform, wasn't taking off. Millions had been spent, hours upon hours of effort poured in, and yet the product wasn't clicking. Tom faced a crossroads: double down or throw it all away. The choice to let go of what didn't work wasn't just strategic, it was existential. What happened next? In a bold move, Tom stripped everything down to a single feature: a medical scribe that transcribed consultations into perfect notes. He'd buried this feature in a suite of offerings, but it was the one thing users loved. And here's the kicker: it wasn't revolutionary, it wasn't some grand vision, it was useful. Heidi 2.0 launched with laser focus, a free tier and a singular goal: help clinicians save an hour a day. That's it, no more complexity, no more platform. The result? Within months, hundreds of thousands of clinicians signed up, viral adoption through shared templates, and a $10 million ARR business born out of simplicity. In this episode, we explore how Tom navigated the existential crisis of pivoting his business, the power of focusing on what users truly value, and the bold bets that led to viral growth in a fiercely competitive AI market. You'll also hear his insights on building a product-led company, creating competitive advantages, and why embracing constraints can drive the best of us. This episode is so packed that I actually need to apologize for not having, well, at least a day to unpack so many of the questions I wanted to ask. But I think that speaks to how much fun we had. And so with that, I hope you enjoyed as much as we did. Let's talk about cannons. If we could just start by reflecting on the journey that has been, ups and downs, twists and turns, through the lens of cannons.
Yeah, so I like the canon because it's the story that we write about ourselves. It's not someone else's story.
And just define canon?
Like the prescribed story of the business, probably from the founders. I think usually this is like the founders just say it, but for us, writing it down has been very helpful. It's like gratuitously long and complicated, and mainly just for me, to be honest, and then helps me clarify what we should do. Yeah, I think so. This year's canon was reflecting on, so it's part 2. The first one was when we pivoted the business away from a product we'd built for almost 18 months. So we'd worked on, it was like a product for GPs. It was basically like an AI infused telehealth platform. So if you think of instant scripts or maybe what you do, the idea was like the average GP clinic could turn on Heidi and they could do these kind of like almost instant asynchronous kind of visits for all sorts of different things. The tricky part was that we would always have to sell to the practice manager, the doctors, the patients. They would have to navigate hot doc bookings versus Heidi bookings. It was very complicated. And really, we never particularly wanted to build that product. It was just the market opportunity we saw to infuse AI into clinical practice. Because the idea of recording a consultation like this in a health context in 2022 seems mental. Like we were trying to get people to scribe their visits and they just wouldn't use it. They were scared. They didn't like the Gen AI stuff. It was maybe 10% worse than what it is today.
Can we timestamp this? Like when was this in the arc?
So we fundraised in 2021, middle of 2021 was when sort of like starting gates. We didn't have a product for doctors yet. And so we spent basically through like middle of 2022 building the first version of the product. Took us almost a year, way too long in retrospect, but it is what it is. Yeah. We basically sold the idea to a lot of practice owners and private equity funds and that kind of thing. Like the concept of you have all these physical clinics, they're bricks and mortar. The doctors are basically indentured servants in these poor rooms. They can't do telehealth properly. If we combine Heidi, this digital platform, with your practice, you can do some mixture of in-person and online, and it'll be great because all the patients want to access you online from their phone, and they currently can't do that. But in practice, it was just way too hard. Like, it was too hard. The doctors didn't really want to do it. They actually liked not having anything online. They would leave their stuff at work. It actually added complexity and annoyance to their day. And so in 2022, end of 2022, going into 2023, we were sort of out of our seed funds. We'd raised $5 million. We had lots of large clinic groups that wanted to implement this product, and ChatGPT had just dropped. And our experience on the ground was that the sentiment just immediately flipped. Everyone wanted what we were initially trying to build. Like, the ambition was just, how do we get AI tooling into doctors' hands? It was super obvious to me, having been a doctor, that pretty much in 20 years, everyone is going to use some AI assistants to do administration, but also probably some clinical decision support, maybe even some low risk care you could probably just get from some system like Heidi. It seems very intuitive that's what's going to happen. But the problem is, like, you can know what the future is, but it's very hard to know what to do in the present. And we thought that that platform would be the way to get there. And then at the end of 2022, all these doctors were like, oh, I'd love to, can I just use this to create my notes? And it's like, yes, but you have to use this whole thing. You have to book, you have to do telehealth, you have to pay. It's like too many, there's almost like jack of all trades, master of none. So we were rolling out to practices. So there was one in Sydney called Doctors & Co. that we rolled out to about 40 clinics, and it was going okay. Like, we had an alpha group of doctors. The metrics for the doctors that were using it were pretty good. Like, there was definitely appetite. Patients want to be able to see their doctors in a digital native way, but it was tricky to find the right incentives for the doctors and for the practice staff and reception. It was like basically an unsolvable Rubik's Cube of different incentives that just could not be solved because there were too many different stakeholders involved in the product. So that was kind of where we were finding ourselves with the clinic onboarding, but we were reticent and stoic, and we were going to push through, and we'd sold on paper to a lot of clinic groups. So that was kind of maybe like more middle of 2023, because we'd gone through 5-6 months of implementing. And then at the same time, with ChatGPT dropping, basically what happened was all of these doctors we'd spoken to and done demos of, hey, if you record your consultation with us, we transcribe it, we can actually write your notes for you, and you can just walk out on time. Like, you don't have to stay after work and write letters and review results and do all this stuff. You can just do it as you go, and you get an extra hour in your day. That idea had gone from being like a bit sci-fi and scary to, oh yeah, I'm open to trying it. Like, instantly, like overnight, like from, I would never do this to, yep, cool. Like, how do I sign up? So we set up a small team in the company. There were 3 people that just focused on this thing. We called it Second. It's a terrible name, but yeah, it was what we called it.
Second.
Yeah, like the second product, counted seconds.
Yeah.
Your second hand or something. Anyway, and we just took out like the one part, which is in the visit, we transcribe your visit and we generate a note. That was it. It was nothing else, not that, revolutionary, but like a couple of little nice ideas.
It was disconnected from the full suite of products that you would build.
Yep. And we had this at the time, a bit of like an anchoring bias of like, oh, if this works, then we'll onboard them to the whole thing. So we did that. We released it to probably 20 people, and the metrics were just off the charts. It was, if someone did 5 sessions with Heidi, their retention was like 90% daily. They would just never stop using it. They would use it for every visit. The only time they would not use it is if they felt it was sensitive or they didn't want to transcribe a session because they thought the patient would feel uncomfortable. But pretty much any other scenario, they would do it. And it's like lightning in a bottle. You see, I don't know, like I've read the startup mythology, and when you see something like that, you just can't ignore it. On one hand, you're doing the most like grueling customer implementation disaster, like people just will not use what you've built. And then on the other hand, one feature within that existing product, if presented in a particular way, they just can't put it down. And so we had these parallel tracks going into fundraising in 2023, we'd made a lot of traction with what we'd built, but we had this kind of undercurrent, like fire starting that we saw what this was going to become, but it was difficult because we were in a position where we had to basically show the progress we'd made from 2021, but take that traction and also like have a footnote that, hey, we've got this thing and it's kind of wild, but you probably won't believe it, but I think this is the thing that travels internationally. Just believe me, basically. That was the pitch, essentially. Yeah, so we raised money. It was great. Had like, a lot of existing investors come back, super funds, a couple others. I guess that gave us the injection, the air to just think deeply about, okay, like what do we have and what do we do? And all of my instincts were that we had to entirely focus on second, as it was called at the time, because it was very clear that it was going to be extremely competitive. We were starting from behind. There are other companies, especially in the US, that have been doing this transcription stuff for almost 4 years. So I'm thinking of like, your Bridges and Nablas and Sukis, these companies who'd raised, $200 million US. And then even locally, there are companies appearing, different accelerators and different practice softwares. And so it was like you were facing this extremely hotly contested war that was starting. And at the same time, we were stuffing around trying to get people to use something that we'd built that like realistically no one actually wanted, as sad as it was. But we had all of the scar tissue of building the wrong thing and all of this go-to-market experience of having worked with these doctors and like understand their behaviors. And so basically December 2023, it was over the Christmas break. That was when we wrote the first canon, back to the start of the story. And it was really like cathartic and therapeutic for me to think through like all of the decisions we'd made. Why did we make them? We built the platform because we had these like kind of slightly diluted visions of capturing data of patients presenting and then finding out what the doctor did. And by doing that, learning how doctors think given certain patient presentations and building some AI ourselves to help, do diagnosis and history taking. And we'd just been completely nuked by the large models. Like we just had to eat it. Like it was no longer like being an AI company and like, the most technical doctor wasn't going to help us win. It was going to be just building a way better product and the rules that had applied before in this product-led SaaS world, we thought would apply again in this kind of AI-enabled software game. So the decisions we made were kind of reckless in a way. Like we made the scribing product entirely free, which was like putting the accelerator down and aiming the plane like at the mountain. It gave us basically 6 months to go from 0 to Series B metrics, or we just die. But actually, it was kind of polarized in a good way. Like for the founders of Bleed, you and I, we spent so much time that it was like, okay, we actually just want this to get to an outcome. Like, let's just go as hard and as fast. Like if we had nothing to lose, what was the strategy that we would pull? And yeah, it made sense. We made it free. We basically bet the whole company that we could build product in a way that Canva could, build features and limitations that kind of prosumer clinicians would pick, and then rely on the word of mouth from the free product to outgrow the competition that had a head start. And it totally worked. So the Canon Part 2 is basically reflecting on that year. And so from the pivot, we're now at like hundreds of thousands of clinician signups and growing pretty close to like 30% month over month. It's still competitive. There's still heaps of decisions to be made, but yeah, it's kind of crazy, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Just dropping the metrics in at the end there. I love it. Number one, it's worth calling out. You're saving clinicians hours each day.
Yeah.
Like no wonder the love is just gushing.
Yeah. My favorite stories are like, I think Heidi was in someone's wedding vows. It was pretty interesting.
What? Oh my gosh.
Like the reason that I like made it to my wedding on time, shout out to Heidi, something like that.
How long did it take for you to launch second and then make the decision to make it first?
So launching probably took us a couple months. So we basically just carbon copied all of the front end that we had for the existing product, deleted all of the features that weren't working, and just focused on transcribing visit, generating note. That was it. Didn't take us that long. The decision to go from second to making second Heidi took us probably 6 months, like from when we first launched the product, because we had these parallel tracks. There was so much momentum and team as well. So that's the really hard thing. Like we had probably about 40 people at one point with like clinic onboardings and teaching GPs how to use the product and sales, and like a lot of organization had been built around this GP product. And so making the decision to pivot also meant like halving the size of the team, which was not something we took lightly. And it basically meant that we had to go back to pre-product market fit engineering, some go-to-market, not much else. But even that, like the people we had brought on were great, but there was almost like a concentration of like what really mattered in January 2024. Like we were all faced with the gauntlet of like live or die, win or lose. How do you take this product from nothing to Series V metrics in less than a year? And I think it helped us. I think that's the main lesson from the previous product. It's like actually like constraints drive great outcomes. You have sometimes the more constrained and more challenging the situation, it makes you make decisions that you wouldn't otherwise make. So I think if we had more resource, we probably wouldn't have made it free. We wouldn't have been as aggressive. So yeah, it's interesting. Like, this is my first company that I've started, and you learn lots. Also, I think I underestimated how powerful product-led motion can be. It's just insane. Like it just grows so fast, so much faster than even just the fact that a free trial is a trial. And even if there's no credit card, it's just like there's like a culture that you instill in the company that your product has to be so good that people who use it all the time for free are willing to pay for it. It's a different standard than some sort of like bait and switch where they accidentally paid off at the end of the trial and now you've got revenue, but actually they don't want it. And it's just like, it's not the same. If your thing is free, someone is choosing to pay, which is a different bar. Would strongly encourage any software company that can be product-led to be product-led in some way, mainly to fix your product and engineering culture to be high quality always. I think it's very helpful.
I think one of the things that makes Aussies and Kiwis some of the best founders in the world is that our geography is an implied constraint that forces us to think globally from day one. Otherwise, you're serving a small population. Whereas the US don't have the advantage of that constraint. And it's why many of the best PLG businesses are born out of Australia in particular. I don't know if you'd feel comfortable with this, but you wrote an email, an open letter to investors where you shared your deepest and darkest thoughts. Would you be open if I read it, or if I sent it to you and you read it to us?
Yeah, I can read it. I can read it in my own voice.
No, thank you.
Here we go. So, as everyone went off for a Christmas break, I felt as empty as the streets around me. We'd catastrophically failed on all accounts since the seed round. We'd taken a detail that was mistaken. The assumptions had been wrong. I struggled to forgive myself for being led away from a clear vision by user interviews and seemingly formidable competitors in 2021. Worse still, everyone had GPT-4 now. We'd missed the chance to be first to market. We'd had a Scribe demo in 2022 that worked pretty well. I began going down the path of wondering about defensibility and long-term differentiation, pensively meandering that typically ended in visions of a world where our foundation model controlling overlords doled out UBI. I gave up being a surgeon for nothing. Bankrupt and abject failure, I'd quit, live out the rest of my days as a failed entrepreneur turned GP, forced to work with the tools that had trampled my dreams. Despite the darkness, I had a reassuring sense that for the first time, we had a product with real users who loved us. It reminded me of the Fraser's experience. We'd been a tutoring upstart amongst hundreds of competitors. This wasn't different. If anything, the incumbents were less established. We won then with customer obsession that had led to a viral fanaticism and brand. Much better product, go-to-market execution, and soul-bending grit. Software is hard and nuanced. Threw away the tissues, headed into the office over the break with the people I trust most to question our assumptions.
Wow.
Yeah.
It explores so much, but in particular, like speaks to the weight that you had been carrying for a few years, and the doubt, the ambiguity, and the reality of chewing glass as a founder bottled up and then shared with your investors And can you share a little bit more about why you had even the courage to go into that sort of detail to share?
So what I said earlier about writing these things, for me as a founder, I'm not someone who seeks much external support. I don't know, maybe it's a trust issue, not sure, but I don't love like leadership coaches, executive types. I just can't. I feel like I can't trust them because I feel like the experience I'm having is my own, and it's really difficult to get someone to the set where I'm at. So for me, the thing that I guess helps me kind of process and think through what's going on and like I guess get like some sort of almost like therapeutic result is writing. And I think your first investors, at least for me, like the Phrases experience was, I'd been a tutor, I worked up to being an owner of the business, but it was not quite the same. And I think a lot of people who have high powered professions that make the jump, there is a lot of embedded guilt and sunk cost fallacy. There's just like this like hanging, looming feeling of like a mistake that I might have made. Like, I could have been X or Y. I could have been operating right now. I could have been, a partner at a law firm or whatever the reason is that you're leaving what you're doing. And yeah, I felt this is how I felt. I couldn't, the really hard thing is I found those that it's very lonely. It's hard to share with your employees exactly how you feel. And for me, being the CEO and like kind of like the medical vision for the business, like Waleed and you rely on me to pick the right product. So even within the founders, I still feel like the one that's most responsible, whether right or wrong, that's just how I felt. So I felt I kind of owed it to the people that had believed in me to like just give them like the complete raw, uncut, like this is what, because we were about to make like a rash decision. Like things were not going as well as we thought. And it was like okay, step on the gas. Like I said, head for the wall and hopefully we like hit the corner and make it around. And to justify that kind of decision and to have everyone believe in me and let us take that high risk decision, it felt like I had to be completely transparent about like everything driving this, all the mistakes we'd made, and to be honest to myself about the mistakes that we'd made, which is more important.
And the beautiful thing about that is on the other side of it, if you have the clarity to own up to the mistake, there's an implied lesson on the other side of it. Can you share some of the mistakes that like stand out?
I think I was trapped by long-term decision making. So, for example, some of the founders that I admire the most have extreme long-term visions of the future that they're trying to build towards. The Elons of the world have a vision of what human beings are going to be doing in 100 years, and like how do I be a part of making that future happen now? That is good in principle. Like the idea that there's some blend of humans and software that deliver healthcare, that always made sense. But the problem is when you try to break it into steps, sometimes the journey that you think you're going to take maybe is a bit contrived. There's too many steps. It's like, you're almost like trying to recreate a narrative before you even have the thing that matters, which is a product that people want to use. So like what we had built was, in my head, like a way to capture patient journeys, and by doing that, then we would capture all this data and we would like learn how to support doctors really well and build this vision of the future that I had. But the problem was that no one actually wanted to use the platform in the first place. Like it was a bit contrived from the outset. And the crazy thing is we had used those large transformers in 2018 and 19. Like the part that I just still can't accept is that I missed it, basically. Like I missed that wasn't going to be us that was probably going to build the underlying models. So I guess the lesson is it's good to have a long-term vision and like be clear about maybe where you want to end up. But in the next week, you just have to focus very precisely on what is your user wanting to use and willing to pay for, and just focus on that. It's actually not that hard to string together what you're doing now and getting to that endpoint. Like actually the ending is kind of easy to find. And the hard part is like the start of the story. Like how do you actually get something that people want and make the business work? And I think that's where some of my mistakes lay. But yeah, you live and you learn.
Yeah, no, it's like Dalio's like Shaper, where like it's this sort of rare trait to A, be able to have the imagination to think long term, and then B, be able to act decisively in the very near immediate future. And like balancing those two is like just different sides of the brain that you can train and you have trained. And it seems to me that the vision remains unchanged, like fundamentally.
Yeah, it's that's the crazy part. Like it's still that's why I feel so. And actually, yeah, the interesting thing, sorry, from that, like there's a line about, I struggle to forgive myself from being led away from a clear vision by user interviews and formidable competitors. So I think the other lesson that I learned is two things, like just never buy into competitors' hype. I think the one mistake that I think I would definitely treat differently if I had another go at it was I kind of mistook like fundraising as a surrogate for success. So when I saw a competitor, for example, like a Bridge raise a $70 million US round, in my head, that meant that they had hundreds of thousands of clinicians using a Bridge and it was growing extremely rapidly. Now, that's not never a reason not to do something, but it made it feel so much more difficult than the reality of it. So I was just in Vegas using their product, and frankly, it's an embarrassment. It's like, yeah, like you can't even change from dot points to paragraphs, for example. So
Wow.
so they are trapped from the pre-GPT world of this product. They've built this like Fabergé egg of AI that can write a note, but I think they're entirely cooked for where this goes. And like I wouldn't want to be their founders. It's like they took our journey, but like 5 years ago, you know. But actually, like I think they're probably, by the time this comes out, they'll probably have announced like a $300 million round, and it's just like it doesn't correlate to the success. If you just go to any given clinic anywhere in the world, they're not using a Bridge. But if you look at the fundraise, you would imply that that's the kind of traction that they have. So I think the competitor point, that's one, and then user interviews early on, like almost always terrible mistake. You should build what you want to build as a founder. Like if you should have had that scar tissue or that like formidable experience. You shouldn't be asking users what to build. So although investing early, I think in my head, I felt like I almost had an obligation to go through some sort of product discovery process rather than just build the thing that I wanted, which was what Heidi is now. It was second, like that's what I wanted. I wanted a thing that sits with me, that writes my notes, does half my work, and makes sure I'm a great doctor. That was what I always wanted to build. It was the thing I pitched Nick in the first meeting that I ever had with him. And yeah, the part that like why I was so annoyed at myself was that I'd just been led astray by like a bunch of tropes and mistakes. But the good thing is, for the next 10 years, I feel like I learned the lesson and survived like the mistakes, so that when faced with a very competitive, challenging situation to try to win. And like now we are competing with a Bridge. We just won a contract in the US, beating them out head to head. It feels like it's like the battle scars you need to actually be able to succeed. If it was easy, I probably wouldn't be worth it. Yeah.
Teach me more about how you think about competitive moat when there is an ocean of competitors, and how annoying it may be to consistently get that question from investors.
I think there are different kinds of competition and how things can play out. So look, I obviously don't know, I can't tell the future, but I think when categories are really obvious and valuable, there's obviously going to be a lot of people going for it. Now, in this market, I think I can foresee a few possible things that will happen. I'm not sure which will happen, but maybe as a way to teach you how I think about it, I'll just walk through it. So one is just a go-to-market competitive advantage. Like there is business model advantage actually is a real thing. Because of the decision to go free, which I think is a one-way decision, I don't think you can go back and make that decision. Like there's pros and cons. Our pro is that we have way more scale, so the brand goes way further. If you just ask any clinician in ANZ and in the UK now, there's puncher's chance they'll say Heidi, and it's purely because it's free. But we have to pay for that. So it's not an advantage you get for free. The challenge for us is that we don't generate revenue from every user. And we obviously have to pay for the infrastructure and the cost to acquire those free users and support them. And so basically the risk adjusted bet we're making is that what matters here is being first and being the dominant brand and the one that people think about first, and that will have some runaway effects, both on cost, which I think we're seeing. So, for example, our transcription is maybe 40% what it used to cost us, and our cost to write with models is probably, like for this exact same model, is probably 30 to 40% what it used to be. And purely because of scale, and we can rent compute because we have steady demand across multiple geos now, and that means our cost is that much lower, and then the free can be funded by that lower cost base. So I guess the way I think of it is like you just have to have some tactical advantage, and you do actually have to be thinking long term about how this plays out. So that's one path. The other path is actually being really tactically integrated with some systems that have a line share, almost like monopolies in certain verticals, and being so like kind of welded to that competitor that it becomes a default choice. This is something we always grapple with. So in different markets, we'll find that one or two competitors are very deeply bound to a certain practice software. And we found clinicians often willing to pay thousands of dollars a year for this product because it's integrated. Even if Heidi's free, they'll still make that choice. I guess, yeah, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I think you just have to have a really clear perspective on how you think the market's going to play out and how you're playing your hand to try to get the best result. So our hand is a practice software or a deeply embedded competitor will not do. For example, engaging patients. So sharing sessions after visits, and patients will be able to talk to Heidi, and we will have Heidi manning phone calls and potentially the front desk, and basically like expanding the net in a way that I think if you're a lightning bolt button inside of Epic, you are probably not doing that. And it's not that it's better or worse, it's just a different thing. You know, a bridge gets acquired by Microsoft and or Epic, that's the out. For us, the out is having a really wide horizontal set of users and probably slightly skewed towards either big systems that configure Heidi for a bunch of workflows across different systems, or small to medium-sized clinics and hospitals that are completely underserved and are using like some constellation of different softwares, so that having one that's super deeply integrated into one part of their overall tech stack doesn't really matter. The other key part is how big is your market? For us, it's every clinician, like every vet, carer, mental health nurse, diabetic educator, doctor, they're all going to use this. And that just means that there's space for probably 3 or 4 great companies around the world. Doesn't have to be one. And it's not obvious to me that it consolidates to one, because like there is kind of different specializations and tracks that you can go on. And then also how valuable is what you're building. So if we're replacing 3 or 4 headcount for a business, that's just inherently so valuable. And if you combine those factors, basically I go home at night and I feel comfortable that there's more than enough market, it's valuable enough, and we can find a niche being the kind of most AI sci-fi product, and we'll just see what happens. But there will be consolidation. You just have to be better. That's the bottom line. You just have to you just have to execute better, be more aggressive. Product has to be better. You have to be the best with your customers. They have to love you more. You have to win the battle of word of mouth. Yeah, and just be ready to deal with all the hostile competitors. Yeah.
So let's talk about the product being better and some of the decisions that now you look back in hindsight and went, oh my gosh, thank God we did that. Yeah, if we just take a step back and look at why are doctors loving it, understanding the why piece to their love for it would be most useful here.
Yeah, I think the bet we made that everyone else didn't was to let every individual user personalize Heidi to an extremely high degree. So it seemed obvious, but the reason it's unintuitive is because the systems that store those notes are very structured and they receive the data in exactly the same way every time. So they'll have, a heading like subjective, which is like, what's the patient's history? Objective, which is the patient's examination. Assessment, which is like, what's your impression of what's going on? And then the plan, like, what are you going to do about it? So it's classic, like SOAP note, there's four boxes. You may have some patient demographic fields like name, date of birth, past medical history, medicines. And at the end of the visit, when you click stop, you really are trying to get that data you've written into those boxes. So we saw a lot of competitors shipping things with, like, for example, 4 separate discrete boxes, and the notes would stream out into those boxes. And you could kind of personalize it. Like, you could you could make edits and they would say like, oh yes, my product will remember the edits I've made. But it's not quite the same as they can write whatever they want. If they want like a haiku about the visit, that's what they get. If they want a section that is a 2-sentence summary of what's going on. So we basically chose to build for power users we built this almost like Heidi coding language of how they could build templates. And it was fairly intentional. Our feeling from the GP experience was that there would be a really small subset of extreme super users that would want all of the tools and want to be able to just do everything themselves. And they would bring everyone else on for the journey. But it was a risky choice because probably the counterfactual to what happened would be that no one can figure out how to build templates. There's no consistency. It's all over the place and just like no one likes it. And so what ended up happening was that in every given practice, there would be one person that set up the templates for everyone and they would share their setup with everyone else. And it was like a really natural expansion. And so we kept on winning these early adopters in different places and it just totally worked. So I guess the key thing was that doctors are particularly pedantic about how they write and that they really care about the way they write, kind of like my writing. It's like emblematic of like how good you are as a doctor. The way you write, the way a colleague reads your note, it's like a currency of how good you are. And we thought that for Heidi to replace that, you would have to be able to write just the way they wanted. And I feel like even today, that's still an unusual trait. Most of the products, the flexibility into toggles and buttons and drop downs, but it's a trade-off because they can't actually go all the way. Like they can't get competitor A to write a BMI with a different unit on it because the BMI dropdown only has the 2 units that the product is built. But a dropdown is much easier to pick than a coding language. There are still products and like kind of late adopter types who prefer the simplicity of some of the alternatives to us. What we have to do is help bridge the gap for them to take them from something that's almost like too powerful. It's almost like imagine like you're trying to write the code of an application and somehow like turn it into components that they can understand and make it very easy for the user that doesn't, care that much about the details, but then still give, the David Kanes of the world, like this urologist who's published, 10 videos about Heidi, just completely of his own volition, give him the tools to do whatever the hell he wants for give him, the most base level access. Again, back to the lessons. I think the lesson is trying to be really intentional about like maybe which group of users you're trying to win and how does that link to your go-to-market motion? Like, are those users the ones that are most likely to share? In a product-led motion, you should probably build something that is most likely to work for the most viral users in that network. That for us is that kind of nerd super user who's going to configure everything for everyone else.
I literally have a million questions. On personalization, what were the product bets that unknowingly have helped today's scribe business that gives you an additional competitive advantage? Talk about the medical knowledge graph and how that plays a role.
Yeah, so I think the difficult truth is that the AI parts of that medical knowledge graph, like I said, got scorched earth. Like we just got torched. Basically what we did was imagine a mind map. You've got pain, for example. Pain can be in different places. So then we would build a mind map of pain associated, like a little branch to chest and a little branch to knee and a little branch to somewhere else. And then, so if you've got pain and chest, then there are other branches linked to those two notes. There could be sudden, could be gradual, could be crushing. And basically, you would kind of compress this knowledge graph using in your network. And you, the patient, would type in your symptom and you'd say, okay, I've had a cough for a few weeks. Heidi would tick some of the bits of the mind map and try to figure out what are the possible conditions that are here. It's literally like a map. Like you're in a certain place in the map, and what questions can we ask to try to rule out the different possibilities and find which one is most likely causing the issue. That technology is what powers a few of the symptom checkers that are out there. But the big problem with them is that medicine is not linear like that. When someone points kind of ambiguously to like their like here, like lower chest, upper abdomen, like do we have to create a new label for that? Like what do we satisfy? Do we satisfy abdo and chest? Now there's too many questions to ask. And the reality is like doctors just learn this naturally. It's like a heuristic. It's not a checklist of questions from A to B. So like we always kind of knew that intuitively, but we were still building a product that had to take a history. So you have to accept some limitations when you're building it. But the lessons we learned was we have built a really strong muscle in the team around medical knowledge. We have a medical knowledge team. For example, although we're using large language models, we'll have thousands of cases that we've built for a long time that are tricky and challenging, and we will run Heidi through those cases. And whenever we want to launch new things or different templates or I don't know, like speaker detection, or we want to test a new model that's really good on low volume or in a new language, we'll just consistently run these cases because we know what good looks like, and we've built and done all that work before. So I think, yeah, it's more like capabilities. I think, at least for us, that it's a tactical advantage in that when we go to a hospital, we can take all of their documents and create a set of templates for them that will recreate all those documents pretty much bang on. Where if I'm just a couple of engineers and like I've found this wedge and I'm building this thing, they probably don't have the depth on the medical side to actually support a deeply complicated templating system. So there is a way that it's linked. It's linked in that the company is medical, like something like 1 in 5 of the Heidis are clinicians by background. It's deeply ingrained. And it means both now but going forward, the things we can build are just going to be way more clinical and way more intuitive for our audience than someone who's coming outside in. And I think that's pretty evidence-based in healthcare. It's pretty hard to build as a founder not having been from healthcare. You can do it. Like there are people that make it, but it's just tough. And that's why I said, like, I don't envy my peers, because the companies that started earlier and actually have large hospitals and organizations that use their existing products, if I'm them, I don't even know what I do. It's very difficult. It's like you're basically trapped because you've done research and QA and you've, told the world about how accurate your models are and how they're, referenceable and they're defined. But the problem is it's very obvious to everyone here that all of the things that make Heidi better than them is the fact that it is based on LLMs, and the rules on the field have changed. The rules on the field used to be, how good is your ML engineering? What data do you have? How well have you trained it? And the GPTs just completely nuked that. It's now about is your UX better? How fast do you get someone to value? Can you change voices on the fly? Can you very quickly emulate different documents? Like it's like the product stuff, the software. It's not about the model level stuff anymore.
Following that, so you're sitting at the application layer. How do you think about, or do you just ignore the layers underneath and just assume that models will get better thanks to OpenAI and others? Do you search for different infrastructure companies to help unlock greater performance? You mentioned how the cost of transcription has decreased and how that bet is sort of paying off. What are the drivers in that?
Yes. So speaking from experience, a lot of the companies like cloud vendors and hyperscalers are actually just not in a position to support scaled products yet. So initially, it's easy to ignore. You just hit the API, it's pretty performant, it returns your result, great. You hit the Microsoft OpenAI endpoint, it returns a result, you're fine. There's levels of failure points that you reach as the numbers grow. So when you have the first maybe 10 simultaneous API queries like all at once on a Monday morning, you realize, oh geez, like that API is actually quite slow when you have more than 10 people hitting start all at once. Then you reach, the 100 and then 1,000 and then 10,000. And it's kind of amazing. I mean, obviously the company's starting now probably slightly better, but when we were starting really the start of this year, like it was just like toy infrastructures didn't work. Like you would just be waiting for 20 seconds and then nothing would appear. It's kind of disaster. And then even if you do redundancy, like you call 4 services at once and then whichever one gets back to you first, you cancel all the other calls. Even that was failing. Like we couldn't even.
Wow.
We had like 10 accounts on Azure that would. No, this was Microsoft's actual solution. Create 10 different companies and then have 10 APIs, and because we throttle each API independently, so then you can call all of them at once. So we were doing this stuff and it was just like so brittle. So I think that making the product work, even just using the third party vendors, it's some tricky balance of like you basically have to get big enough for them to care about you and then negotiate with them ideally for some sort of like real like at the metal level, like either chips assigned to you or some provision throughput special treatment, which again, it's going back to like what advantages we have. The scale helps. People want our business now, which helps us negotiate for better performance, which then gets us more users, and then like it's a good flywheel. As far as the actual models, it was part of our canon. I think we do have to be able to own our own weights because. So I still take the assumption that models will improve. It's probably a log curve. They can only get so smart. But for our tasks in medicine, the intelligence matters. Like every last 5 or 10% improvement, we notice a really material difference in Heidi's quality. Because they're usually interpreting like very tricky conversations. There's medical components. There's, what's happening in the room, multiple speakers. It's not a trivial task. For chat, yeah, I don't know how much better it can get. But for like the real fringes of a deep category, like medicine, every last centimeter matters.
When you were describing the product before, like Act 1, with all those different features, you are touching different users within a healthcare organization. Hilariously, there's also now dentists and vets and other users engaging with Heidi. So like perhaps just share a bit about the journey of focusing on a user and any lessons you could share there.
What I've learned, I'm not sure how well this applies to other settings, but surprisingly, clinical interactions are pretty universal. Whether it's a vet or a dentist or even like school counselors or caring type relationships, there's just basically you're a professional. There's someone or people you're taking care of, and there's an engagement and conversation that happens. So unintentionally, we sort of walked into lots of different settings. Like we walked into multidisciplinary meetings, 10-person conversation about what to do for a certain cancer diagnosis or school counseling. We've had schools buy like 20 licenses from us for conversations that employment counselors are having or job counselors are having with their kids to share with parents. So I guess, yeah, if you build like a really good thing and be like maniacally focused on like a really niche thing, which for us is just that more medical side of the engagements, sort of the thing you build, especially if you have a free motion, is often a lot better than tools that are built for kind of really niche markets that maybe charge slightly too much. And that, again, going back to like tactical advantages, again, I don't know exactly how all this plays out. No one does, but it's sort of like because we're so horizontal, we have more users and more market that kind of subsidize everyone else getting it for free. Whereas I think if you're like very vertically focused, your market's just that much smaller. So it becomes harder to give more away. Like we see it in our data, different demographics have very different willingness to pay, but how important those users are to us to get hospitals and large contracts differs quite a lot. So for example, like psychiatrists and psychologists work in a really isolated way, usually on their own in private practice, and they're not actually that helpful to us to acquire other larger customers, generally speaking. But they're absolutely the best customers of Heidi using it for themselves day to day. And their willingness to pay is very high. Like that, maybe 60% of psychiatrists and psychologists that are active end up paying for Heidi. So it's like a really high number. But the hospitalists and the registrars, like the juniors and the nursing staff, just generally, they don't have the ability to pay for Heidi. But they all work in hospitals. So when we, for example, Bendigo Hospital recently, I think like sent through some sort of like poll to their staff. And we know that we have 50 people using Heidi in secret at Bendigo Hospital. So when these tenders appear, there's just this like kind of secret army of like whisper network that's been built in all of these different places. So I guess be really focused about who your user is and who you're building for. But if you can afford to be slightly horizontal and like accept people from different settings that might find your tool useful, I think it's worthwhile because it helps the business to be just a little bit bigger and have a little bit of a greater audience. We just have to be a little bit more careful about maybe our landing pages and our website and like speak to a couple of different use cases. but we still call ourselves a medical scribe. And so people know that. And like our copy is very medical centric. But yeah, it's just worked in a way that I wouldn't have expected.
And so here's a challenge. Coming into this, I go, oh, like, what a wonderful place to start a user journey. You're at the beginning of a new or existing patient journey. You're transcribing that. And then it's not too impossible to go, oh, we're at the get-go. Like, let's build additional units of value vertically between doctors and patients. And then you can start to get as imaginative as you want and then prioritize effectively. The counter to that is, which I'm hearing, sort of like you could make the argument to say that, well, why don't we just jam it with as much horizontal value? The nature of transcription is universal in nature. And then you go think down that pathway where like we actually want to be useful for anyone who has a relationship between patients, whether it's a dog or... So perhaps like just take us through that debate, because it's a universal like product question.
Yeah.
The dream is to arrive at a place where you're at, which is we have like a really specific use case that starts at the beginning of a journey. And now we can be as responsible as we want and build more and more value and jam that in over time.
Yeah.
But yeah, help us understand a bit more about those two paths.
Yeah. So again, like no one knows for sure, but the way I'm thinking about this at the moment is I'm trying to think ahead of, as these products specialize, to what extent can you maintain your audiences in different verticals? So I'll give you an example. In dentistry, a very common thing is OPGs or dental x-rays of teeth to see if there's decay and like how your teeth are going. And there are some products starting to appear that do scribing, but they also do dental x-ray, like automated reporting. And is that something we could do? Yes, but it feels a bit orthogonal. Like being able to do that is not really important to the doctors we're serving. And so I think the key thing is you just have to have a user that you're making your 51-49 decisions for. Like where you're not sure about what to do in your roadmap, you have to be building for someone. And then you take the horizontal part, I think, more as like a nice to have, like a feel good story of the equine vet that loves Heidi, but maybe it's not the one that you wake up every morning building for. But so that being said, I'm a little skeptical of how important verticalization is in this category for a couple of specific reasons. There's this careful interplay between what something like Heidi does and what the medical record does ultimately. The medical records are really that system of record. They're like the database in this modern world. And I don't think that's going to change. All of the government APIs and all of the data that clinician has is living inside this system. And the cost to switch is extremely high and the value of switching is very low. So if you take that as an assumption, anything that the medical records probably should do becomes somewhere where like maybe we don't play. It's something where we partner. So, for example, there's a scribe in Europe, Upheal, there's Metallic, there's like all these specific vertical ones. And essentially, they're just building like AI EHRs. That's what they're building, like electronic records. This is the wedge. I'm getting all this data. It makes sense. I just build on the end of it, like billing, payments, appointment and scheduling. And I think that'll work. There will be a group of users that love Upheal enough that they will pick that path and it makes sense. So that's one path. It's credible, makes sense. It's a type of business. It's just not what I want to do. But you can, like, people can do that, and I think they will win parts of the market. My intuition is that the correct decision is you don't try to disrupt the databases that everyone has, because that's where the data exists. You know, if you've got 40 years of a patient living inside of a system, it's just very annoying to try to move it. And then where this goes is Heidi becomes the main way that clinicians interface with that system of record. So for example, when I go to bed, Heidi is using my computer remotely, pre-charting and going through every patient I'm about to see the next day, looking through every note and every result, calling radiology departments on behalf of me to chase results that I haven't received. And then I wake up and I go to practice, and in my context tab, I see all of the stuff that Heidi's done the day before with references of what it's found. And that is a incredibly hard thing to build, is not something a medical record is likely to do. And it's really like creating this embodied assistant that goes with the clinician wherever they go. So if you want Heidi to man your front desk, sure. set it up on a phone number. If you want Heidi to call your patients every other day after you prescribe a new medicine, sure, no worries. Like you just click a button and Heidi will call them and flag it to you later on. And those features, I think, are hard enough and valuable enough that they will live independent of trying to build a whole medical record. Like they'll be way too hard. So back to your point about like verticalization versus horizontal, I think it's very dependent on the context. In this context, I think what I'm betting on is that whoever builds that horizontal assistant that can basically remote into any record, can talk to patients, can listen in while you practice, can reference guidelines. Essentially, you're building like a doctor in bits. Like it's a digital doctor, can kind of do everything you can. They just can't put hands on the patient. And that thing is immensely valuable and probably doesn't really matter what record you use or what systems you use. And we look to partner with all of the systems in a deep way, share revenue, do partnered offerings, because I just don't think they are capable of building that product. Like they can build the lightning bolt that fills the note. They can probably build the scribe eventually that's competent, but I don't think they can do remote access, talk to patients. Like we can go so much faster on the everything that wraps the clinician. And so for me, that is very horizontal. I don't think that is vertical. Reading the dental x-ray is probably not important and something that lives in the record because that's where the x-rays are. But calling the patients feels universal. If you can schedule for dentistry, you can schedule for medical. The guardrails and safety netting is the same. Yeah, but I don't know. But maybe multiple people build these and there is specialization and I'm not sure. But there's all these like cost advantages and like the free model and we can make it cheaper and wider than everyone else can. I'm not sure. We're going to focus on medicine for the 50/50s, but definitely build horizontally and it'll be like a T. Medicine probably extremely deep, but then we will have a lot of users on the margins and we'll just see what happens. Yeah.
Can you share why you decided to launch a free trial? I'm just curious how you think about amplifying that virality and why free trial was where you landed on.
Yeah, so we tried a lot of things. I feel like we were fairly quantitative about it. It was just still in second days. But we tried a lot of different things. So I think of it as just free. Like, I don't even think it's a trial because they can just use it for free. I think it was more like, do we have a in-product limitation?
Okay, so it is a freemium model.
Yeah, proper freemium.
Yeah, take a step back and just walk us through the pricing model.
Yeah, so the free tier, basically you get 5 templates. So one that's built for your specialty and then 4 very stock standard note types that you get for free. That's basically... But there's no limits. You can do 2-hour consultations. You can do whatever you like within those constraints. If you want to personalize and get into building custom templates, you have to upgrade to the pro tier. But you still get a trial, so you can upgrade to the pro tier and you can try it for a week or a couple of weeks. Yeah, so that decision was mainly quantitative. We tried, and again, it goes back to the scar tissue. Knowing the clinicians, our experience had been they found it really difficult to find time to learn new things. And so inevitably, even if you had like a 30-day trial, they just would never quite tip over in a way that would make them pay. So, I think our free trial conversion rate was something like 5% or something terrible. And it was, not only was it terrible, it was kind of unsolvable problem. It was always, they were too busy. Because you wanted Heidi to save time, but they were already working till 7 p.m. So then, where do they find the time in the day to learn this new tool? So they would always churn off the trial, never having actually tried it properly. And then we did a test where we were like, okay, like let's just make it entirely free. And what ended up happening was they would come on, they'd try it once, it would take them maybe 5 or 6 weeks. But once they hit the activation metric, which for us is around like 8 sessions, and especially if they do them sequentially on a day, then it was like, oh man, like the stickiest metrics you've ever seen in your life are crazy. But it was like all about getting them to that activation point, not really about, it wasn't like time-based. They didn't respond to our emails. We literally couldn't do anything to get them to that activation metric. We're better now, but even now it's very hard. It's mainly internally motivated. They have to be willing to try it with their patients, which is a big leap. Like from compliance point of view, safety, there's just like so many concerns, which are all fair enough. Yeah, so when we made it free over a long time series, it just worked way better. Once we knew we had to do that, then I'd read a lot like Good to Great and all these different books about trying to link the thing that you think matters most to whatever people pay for. Like you want like a flywheel where what people pay for is the thing that differentiates your product. So for us, it was all about personalization was the thing. So I always wanted to make the thing they pay for personalization because I thought that it was like first they got to the leap of creating their notes, and then the second acknowledgement was like, man, I wish I could write like X. And then it's like, oh, you can do that, but that's part of the paid product. So it's like a very natural going from like getting value, understanding how it works, and then taking that and paying for the product to get it to the last 30 or 40% of value. You asked a question about thinking about virality or like the users that matter most. It depends a lot on the business, I think, like trying to generalize this for others listening. But if you can find like whoever is networked in the customers you're going for, like who are the people that are likely to share and who are the people that, and what are their characteristics, what kind of product and behaviors are they likely to have? And is there a way that you can somehow link the incentives so that they're likely to share the product? So for us, that's our template community. You know, it's not an original idea, whether it's Canva or safety culture or whoever, but same idea. So, you know, I think we have 1,500 different templates now across the world, people in Canada, like all over the place that have built really specific templates that out of the box immediately work for, you know, a Canadian GP in Ontario, for example, that is like entirely different to an NHS GP, different from a, you know, psychiatrist in Melbourne. And I don't know if I'm over like hyper rationalizing it, but it feels very tightly coupled to the whole strategy of the product. Like personalization is the thing. It's also the thing that becomes shareable. And that virtuous cycle means that people will onboard on the product wanting some special template that someone they admire has built. And to get that, you have to pay, but they don't have to pay immediately. They can try it and get enough value that they're willing to pay. So it's like, it just works. And you have to try to find that thing in product led, like what are the right hooks really depends on, I think it's like that tipping point. You want to get them to like 60%, and then whatever the thing they have to learn is, that's the thing they should pay for. But you should give them everything they need to understand that it's worth paying for. You have to give enough away for free to tip them over.
Especially for scaled companies, one of the hardest things to do is to change fundamental DNA. And like one of the fundamental DNA features of Heidi was that it was a sales led. It had a sales engine. You like had a huge pipeline. You had to take many different levels of an organization through the different parts of your product. Then you entirely flipped into a PLG business. And that's really, 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 really hard to do. And most can't do it. And I just wanted to have a chat to you about that and just go, wow, how did you do it?
I think it's to do with our team strategy, like who we try to bring into the team. So we have a very polarized way of hiring. We hire people who are completely fresh grads or maybe like slight startup experience, like 1 or 2 years. Because basically what we believe, it's not for every company, but for us, like molding the way someone thinks and operates to be like you is the absolute best way to just scale you as a founder. Because it's like having 10 right hands that trust you, admire you, want to be like you, have learned everything from day dot from you. It costs more, it's more investment, but that's why we launched basically like 4 countries in 3 months without stuffing up the whole company, because all of the people running those regions had worked with us for years and have been just like culture stamped in a way that you just like, if you're hiring someone who's coming with a set of lessons, it's very hard to unwind the lessons they've learned. And it's not a bad thing. It's just for us, that's just not what we look for. But on the other hand, you also look for like seasoned operators, people that we would work for. They have so much experience and muscle memory that they are just the absolute best at whatever they do, like go to market, different things. So basically when we made the flip, we essentially like rebased the company to be just the people that were culture stamped by us, had learned from us from the beginning. And because of that, they had very flexible like because they'd been through us trying to find the right thing, so they didn't really have too much attachment to what we were doing. In fact, the opposite. We all kind of wanted to do this product-led thing. We all loved products. Like the products we used were always very PLG, linear, Slack. Like we loved the products, and it was almost like a torture that we weren't doing it, but it was the business we had. So I think like the DNA was always kind of there. It was like this conflict of we had always wanted to build something that users would love, but we had been forced, at least in our minds, to sell top down. And anyone who, unfortunately, who fell in the middle or was like part of onboarding clinics or was like, more in like sales, kind of middle management, we just let everyone go. They just didn't have a role in this new version of the company. And we said sorry, and we'd made a mistake, and we owned it, and we just moved on. And I think it's been okay. I think if we had to do it now, like, with 90 people, it would definitely be way more tricky. But I'd like to think that the people we bring on are very flexible and are not too bound to their historical lessons. Because even now, like I don't know, I'm bringing on like a founder's associate, again, looking for someone who's just like basically a grad with very limited experience. Another company would probably hire like a chief of staff with 10 years of experience. It's just not our culture. Like I want to teach this person how to think like me, and then I will trust them. Whereas if they're coming from Uber and they've run a city before, I just can't get there. It will just take a while, and by the time the investment and like the time will end up in like either it'll work really well, which will be like great, but in the case of the grad, like almost always we can mold them into what we want them to be. Yeah, but it's like you got to choose. There's no right answer for us. Like we like that mentorship, seeing people grow. That's our favorite part of the business. So we always anchor towards doing that more than not if we can.
It's prediction time.
Sure.
Can you share some predictions for 12 months? You can choose the time frame.
Yeah, all right. 12 months is good, like end of next year. I'll try to go more macro than just Heidi. So I think most people will have had an experience scheduling something with an AI, like voice to voice, real time. It's totally ready for mainstream. And so I hope that maybe half the GPs in ANZ are using Heidi to schedule appointments and talk to patients. I think there's a puncher's chance. Maybe not half is ambitious, but we'll do our best. I think it'll go really fast. Yeah, so probably most of the people listening to the call in a year from now will have had a phone call from Heidi about something medical. Yeah.
That is so cool.
What else? So at least this is very like for us specific, but I think a lot of practice softwares and medical records will have given up trying to do AI stuff themselves. They'll realize that they're missing a trick and limiting their opportunity, the opportunity of the category by like kind of deluding themselves that they can do it themselves. It's already happening. Like a lot of them are tipping over, but basically what you're seeing now in the market is a lot of softwares, usually like big incumbents, like all around the world that's launching, insert AI, whatever. And I think they'll find that adoption and product is way harder than they thought. They probably need to spend their whole team solely focusing on that thing to make it work. And then they will just partner way more. They'll be, partnering with us, partnering with others. I think because it's just like very tricky. Like you have to basically build a whole business around doing this well. And it's just not the same as building enterprise software. What else? Probably like outside chance, but I think patients will start using tools like Heidi to keep their clinicians to account, whether consensual or not. I think it's going to be quite common. Like, I think the first step of this is kind of like ChatGPT, your symptoms and try to figure out what's going on beforehand. But I think the natural evolution of this is like, there's kind of like pendants and like necklaces that listen and follow you around. I don't know about 1 year, maybe 2-3 years, but it feels like it's going to be a place where Heidi or any system is actually for both. So like the patient can have the conversation with their assistant anytime they like, medical or not. And then that information goes to the doctor, that consultation happens. And like on both sides, the systems are kind of guiding and doing work for either party. Maybe like 4 or 5 years away for most people, but it's definitely going to start happening more and more. And I think doctors are already experiencing this. So they're almost talking to like a peer because the patient now has, a pretty decent doctor in their pocket that can give them a good differential diagnosis. And it makes it challenging
because the systems aren't that good. Like they often will get weirdly biased towards whatever symptoms you put in first, and it's not perfect. So yeah, I think trying to like bridge the gap between the patients and the doctors, patients will start recording a lot more, I think.
Oh, I have to apologize to the audience because like there was literally a million things I could ask you, and I'm so sorry for all the questions that I couldn't get to.
That's okay.
But it goes to show just how awesome that time was. So thank you so much for joining us in Wild Hearts.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you, Mason.
Thank you so much for joining us on this latest episode of Wild Hearts. If you want to learn from other ambitious people that are building, designing, and creating the world that we want to live in, then please hit the follow or subscribe button. It would mean the world to us here on the Wild Hearts team. We have an insane producer, Melia Rayner, an incredible editor, Andy Jones from Welcome to Day One, and our marketing and content support is provided by Jonathan Bleakley, and we couldn't do it without them. If you're searching for investment, please, my DMs are open. Find me on LinkedIn. I'd love to help. And so with that, we'll see you next week, Wild Hearts.